talk about exceptions. We're going to look at what an exception is. We're going to discuss the differences between checked and unchecked exceptions, and then we're going to have a look at some examples and discuss best practices for both. So an exception is a type of error that can be thrown in your Java app, and when properly handled, they can be dealt with in a way that means that the app doesn't crash and it can continue to run any code that is supposed to run afterwards. There are two different sorts. There's checked and unchecked, as I've mentioned. Checked exceptions are looked for before the app compiles, which means that we'll probably see some errors if we're not dealing with them correctly. And unchecked exceptions don't have to be, aren't looked for before or during compilation. So let's take a look at our code that we were writing. So we've got our main function and our calculator that we were calling out to. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a delay into our add function. So we're going to add a delay of 2000 milliseconds, and as you can see, IntelliJ is already telling us that we're not handling exceptions properly. Now the reason for this is that the sleep method throws an interrupted exception, which is a type of checked exception. So we need to deal with this in a particular way, and we get two options. We can either encase all of our code in a try-catch block, or we can note here in the method signature that this method throws an exception of the particular type, and then have the main function deal with what to do in the event of an exception. So let's do that now. So it throws interrupted exception, and as you can see, that error has now moved over to the main function where we're calling the add method. So what we need to do is add that try-catch block around here. So we add the try block and we add the catch block. So we want to catch interrupted exceptions if they're thrown. And what that'll do is the try block will, as you can imagine, try to do the code that's inside there. And in the event of the exception that we've specified, the execution will fall through to the catch block, and that will run instead. So in this case, we're just going to print out the exceptions message. Now, we can't force the sleep app to have an interrupted exception because that comes as a result of a server going offline. So what we're going to do is we're going to force our add method to throw a new interrupted exception with the text message, just a test. And if we now run our program, we should see that we are asked for two numbers as we were expecting. So add 4, add 5, we get the 2-second delay that we've asked for, and then we get the message passed back, just a test, where we've thrown the interrupted exception. So that's all handling fine, and then we can see down here that we've got our message out to say that calculation is completed. Fantastic. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to comment that out so it doesn't run every time we run the program. We're going to bring in the divide. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that users can't divide by 0. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to check against the value of the second number that we're taking in. If it's 0, then we want to throw a new arithmetic exception with the message, you can't divide by 0. And otherwise, we want to continue running our calculation. So now, if we run our app, we should see, ask for a number to divide, we give it 6, we give it 0 as the second number, and we see a massive error come up. And the reason for that is that we haven't handled this exception, we've just thrown it, and when you throw an exception, the app crashes. So we need to do the same thing as we've done previously. Here, we don't have to deal with this arithmetic exception because it's an unchecked exception, but it's good practice to do it in exactly the same way that we have done for the checked exceptions. So we'll just note that it throws an arithmetic exception, and here we'll do the same as we've done previously. Wrap this in a try-catch block, and we're looking for an arithmetic exception. if that happens, just want to do the same thing again, just print out the message. There. So now, if we run this, we should see that we can't divide by 0, and we've got proof that the application has continued execution. So that was exceptions. We've looked at what one is, we've talked about the differences between the two, looked at a couple of examples, there were a lot more, and we've talked about how best practice is to deal with both of them in the same way. Hope that helps. Cheers.